You may be seated. Shana Tova. All right. Day 2. These are the real warriors here. We're still digesting yesterday's brisket. We're seeking. The good thing about having Larry in the shul is you know when he thinks something is funny. We're still seeking and finding those meanings of prayers that we come to year after year, looking for depth and understanding. And at this moment, I am coming back to a conversation I had with a younger member of our congregation a few months ago, back in May. He's about a year out of school, and it was right after the war with Hamas in Gaza. And we were talking. He lives and works in Manhattan, and he has this beautiful Magen David Jewish star necklace. And he said, you know, never before have I thought about it, but I don't necessarily feel safe wearing it while I walk out on the streets. And he said, and you know, I'm really not happy with how my school has been responding to the war and the things they've been saying and what we're hearing from the professors. And in these statements, I really heard two separate questions. The first is the surface question, which is obvious, which if you've ever turned on the news in the last 6 months to 5 years, is on all of our minds. Are we still safe? What does the rise in anti-Semitism mean? Where is it coming from, and what can we do? And on that question, we are blessed to have quite a number of organizations working hard to both educate us, but also give us the tools we need to push back, to demand a safer and more tolerant society. I encourage you to pay attention to the ADL, the JCRC of Long Island, UJA, and the AJC. In fact, on November 3rd, we're joining the local synagogues and having a Zoom presentation on their annual report on anti-Semitism. I hope you'll join in. But for this morning, it's the second question that I think was underneath the first that I really want to focus on, because I suspect, even if we don't admit it, many of us have it lurking in the back of our minds. The question is not just, was I safe to wear this necklace? But can I still wear it proudly? There has been, listen, Israel in the media has never had an easy time of it. Israel in the world is held to a double standard in almost every way possible. Israel is expected to do things that no other country ever would, but in the last 6 months, particularly last May, there was a flood, a tidal wave, an avalanche, choose your metaphor, of news articles, headlines, social media posts that said some of the most horrific things possible about the Jewish state. Words like racist, genocide, apartheid, colonialism were just some of the words thrown at us. Over and over, from every corner, from elected officials to news representatives, over and over. And I have to imagine that at some point, at least part of ourselves was asking, what is true? Can we still be proud of our state of Israel? And I want to say something before I answer that question, which is to say, without a doubt, what it means that Israel is a real state and not an imaginary idea we had for 2,000 years means that I guarantee you, if I sat down with each and every one of you individually and we looked at all the actions the state has taken, every one of you would find something that you were embarrassed by, something that you wished with all your soul Israel had not done. I know that's true because if I took out the word Israel and put in the word America, I know each of you would have the same reaction. Not only that, but as we look at those media posts, of course, there are some that are lies, and of course, There are some that are just believing the propaganda from groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. But many of them, in fact, are not lying. What they're doing that is so harmful and difficult is that they are cherry-picking their facts. They are choosing the parts of the story that fit the narrative they've decided they want to tell. And so, yes, we should challenge and question and wonder. And yes, we should find safe places to do that. But this year and this moment, I want to take a minute and tell you that there are other ways to tell the story of Israel that are true, that are full of facts, that say with great things, the way we can hold our heads with pride, our backs straight, and say, yes, the Jewish state of Israel is an endeavor, an idea, a reality that we can be intensely proud of. And I don't even want to take the time to do the things that I bet you could tell me back. Things like the startup nation, the amazing technological advances, the way Israel has led the world in vaccines and other medical research, or even the enormous effort the IDF puts into acting as morally and ethically as possible. Those are great things, but I want to tell you 3 stories of Israel that perhaps have flown under your radar. 3 things that maybe when you see those headlines, you can at least pause and hold on to another narrative as well. I want to talk about museums. I want to talk about nonprofit organizations, and I want to talk about a specific organization called Israel. First, museums. You wouldn't think necessarily the most exciting topic in history, but I Googled it, and there's a bit of a debate, but at the very least, there are at least 86 museums in Israel. I want you to think, for 86 museums for a country that has roughly 4 cities. There is a museum dedicated exclusively to the Jewish heritage of German-speaking Jews. Another museum to the Yemenite heritage of the Jewish world. And literally any adjective you put in front of Jewish, they have a museum for the heritage of that subgroup of people. In addition, they have a museum, but not just that, a museum of modern Arab art. Egged, the national bus company, has a museum of modern vehicles and how the goods. Not only that, but if you look at the archaeological research being done by Israel, by all counts, in a per capita, Israel has more square footage of archaeological digs than any country in the world. And why that's all exciting is not just that when you hopefully all join me, not this December, but next December, on our next trip to Israel, we have fun places to go. But it means fundamentally that when Jews after 2,000 years got a state, a place to call their own in the Holy Land, they said, what do we need? We need places where everyone can learn. We need places that celebrate our history, that learn from it. We need to be the kind of place that takes our time, our energy, our resources, and over the top does it, so that each of us can learn and do more and understand more. That's one story. A second story is about nonprofit organizations in Israel. I Googled it as well, and there are multiple lists of nonprofit organizations in Israel. In fact, this I don't have facts on, but I'm pretty confident there are more nonprofits per person than any other country in the world. But one list caught my eye, 19 separate NGOs working specifically to bridge the divide between Palestinians and Jewish Israelis. There were groups forming education groups so that Palestinians and Jews could learn side by side. There were groups trying to organize victims of trauma so that they could learn together to grow and face the world differently. There were ecology groups gaining together to try and fight for a better environment. There were groups focused on legal action, groups focused on social change, everything you can imagine, which means that one of the stories of what it means to have a Jewish state is these people who work a lot. It's not cheap to be an Israeli. They said, when we get home from work, we're going to spend our time, our energy, and our resources trying to get to know exactly the people we least understand, the people the media tells us are our enemies, we're going to give everything we had to make them people, to make them the kind of people we can know. That's what it meant to build a Jewish state in the Jewish land. To build the kind of place where that's what we do with our time. And third, I don't know if you've ever heard of Israel or not, but what an organization. A group of Israelis got together and said, what do we have that maybe no one else does? What are we the best at? And talk about turning a negative to a positive. They said, we're the best at responding to disaster. We know when things go really bad, we know what to do. And a group of people after the army got together and they created an international organization that is the first on the ground when disaster strikes. When there was just an earthquake in Haiti, Israel was on the ground. The typhoon in the Philippines, Israel was on the ground. They are permanently, at this point, on the ground in Colombia, working with Venezuelan refugees, creating safe places for children to learn, teaching job skills to people so they might find a way and make a living. They were in Greece as waves of Syrian refugees got in rafts, floated across the Mediterranean looking for a better life. The CEO and founder of the organization is not just a CEO, he's one of the responders. He was on the shores in Greece, and there was a father and daughter he literally pulled out of the water. And as he's giving food to this young girl, the man looks at him and says, my whole life, he's from Syria, my whole life I've been taught that Jews, that Israelis are the devil, that you are the worst. And now in my country, my government bombs my town, and you're feeding my daughter. What does it mean to have a Jewish state? It means we come together and look for those in need, those who are not us, but around the world, and say, we can help them, so we will. In fact, on Hanukkah, the Thursday of Hanukkah, I have a speaker from Israel who's going to join us. I hope you'll join so we can hear more about the amazing work that they do and what they are about. I have one more bonus story when you want to know what does it mean to have a Jewish state. I was talking to a family I know whose child was studying in Israel when the war broke out. Not a college student, a high schooler. And thank God where he was not an area where rockets were falling, but we really didn't know what was going to happen. And he had cousins who lived in Ashkelon, which, if you know anything about the map of Israel, Ashkelon is exactly where the rockets were falling. And from the bomb shelter, his cousins called him in the safe place and said, are you doing okay? Are you doing okay? What does it mean to build a Jewish state? It means to build the kind of place where its citizens spend their time and energy and resources trying to make sure the world is the kind of place where we learn. The world is the kind of place where we fight exactly to know the person we least understand, where we go to exactly where it is worst and do our best to provide food and necessary supplies. It is the kind of place where our first concern is our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, our larger family. Are they okay? So I promise you, even though we may be in a bit of a lull, that the tidal wave will return. That the stories will come back, the headlines, the social media posts, the Instagram stories will be back. When they do, it's okay to have that question in your mind, but I hope also you remember that we can be proud, that the state of Israel is, of course, a wonderful place, that it is a place that takes the Jewish story and lives it out in reality, that though it may not be perfect, it is our home, and it is a place that we can be enormously proud of. Shana Tova. Thanks for the applause, Larry. I appreciate it. We continue now with the repetition of the Musaf Amidah on page 246. We rise as the ark is opened. By 246, I obviously